Let's start right where Way Too Early ended. Let's get right to the breaking news. Just moments ago, a looming railway strike that would have been devastating to the U.S. economy, now possibly averted. The White House releasing a statement from the president within the past hour saying that a tentative agreement has been reached between rail carriers and workers. The issue was sick time. The president said the deal ensures rail workers will get, quote, better pay, improved working conditions, and peace of mind around their health care costs. Amtrak had preemptively suspended most long-distance routes to avoid stranding passengers in case a deal wasn't reached. A strike would have had a devastating impact on the economy since 40% of goods shipped long distance in the United States use the rail system. There has been no word yet from the labor unions or railway companies involved, but we'll be watching, Willie.
Let's go back to Jonathan Lemire. He's, of course, the White House bureau chief of Politico, host of Way Too Early, and the author of the bestseller, The Big Lie. So, John, this was just announced a few minutes ago, as you reported on Way Too Early. This would have had massive implications, obviously, for supply chains. It could have impacted inflation if it carried on for some time. How did they fix this deal?
Yeah, first of all, let's start with the possible consequences would have been, as you just hit it. The American supply chains just now creaking back to life after the pandemic. This would have been devastating. Inflation, we know the cost of goods, particularly food, already up. This would have exacerbated that dramatically. So much of the American agriculture industry depends on these trains. And if they had stopped and food couldn't get anywhere, prices would have just continued to surge. Now, passenger travel, that would have been largely unaffected. The Northeast corridor here, Boston to Washington, that would have kept going. But certainly people would have had a harder time getting around the country elsewhere. And there's also would have been the political impact. This would have been, in no uncertain terms, a devastating blow to this administration. Joe Biden would have been in a real bind. He, of course, very pro-labor, very pro-worker, perhaps one of the most pro-worker presidents we've had in a long time. And he couldn't be seen as pushing workers to take some sort of deal they didn't want, even though the ramifications of a strike politically 6 weeks, 7 weeks before the midterms would have been very difficult for Democrats, already worried about inflation. So overnight, we do have a deal. We can report that President Biden last night made a call about 9 p.m. into the proceedings, acting as a closer, if you will, to get this done. And we heard from him this morning saying it was a good deal for workers. We also heard from Labor Secretary Marty Walsh, who said that this deal avoided the catastrophic impacts on industries, travelers, and families across the country had the strike happen. So still has to go to the union for a vote, but there's a cooling off period here, Willie. So therefore, there won't be a strike, even if the vote is rejected by members. Both sides feel confident this can get done. A major crisis averted, it would appear, for Biden administration and the country.
Yeah, and as Mika just reported, Amtrak had already begun to prepare for a strike that could have taken place today, stopping its cross-country rail service so people wouldn't get stranded in different places if there was, in fact, a strike. That has been averted for the time being. This obviously, John, it's interesting. We saw President Biden in Detroit at the car show yesterday touting his union credentials, saying he's a car guy. He's called himself the most pro-union president in history. How much was his hand on this negotiation? We know Marty Walsh, the labor secretary, was at the table all week working on this. But how much did President Biden get involved here?
Yeah, Walsh had 20 straight hours of negotiations here in Washington with the two sides. But the president played a role as well. He talked to on Monday while in Boston, where he also had an event that touted union workers and in his ties to them. He called both sides. That was sort of his initial entree into the negotiations. We can report he had an event this week at the White House touting the Democrats' new legislative achievements introduced by a union worker. So he's not shy about touting where he sides, and he knew he needed to get this deal done. And as we've seen this as a pattern recently, where he steps into negotiations, he's done it with some congressional legislation, and he's done it now. He steps in at the 11th hour, acting as the closer. And his call last night is being perceived by both sides as an important moment to get a deal done. Obviously, we're still learning details about what's in it, but significant news early this morning.